What up guys? Today I want to talk about elephants in Age of Empires 4. So let me start by saying that elephants as a concept and as a unit, they're very interesting, they're very intriguing, because they have this feel of being big and scary, but also slow, and your opponent maybe has to play around them, and they definitely have a lot of unique feel. And also I would say they're quite good for the game, because they give daily something unique to work with. For example, English have longbows, Achery have strong infantry, and if you're playing Abbasid you get camels, so when you play Daily Sultanate you also get elephants. But for many reasons, elephants are just not the best unit to use in most games. For example, it's way too easy to counter them by playing spearmen and other units. Also, because they're so slow, it's simply very hard to use them outside of combat. And even if you end up making elephants, it is not clear if they actually give you any value, just because they're so expensive. So in this video I tried to analyze them, and if I analyze elephants, try to see what are their good sides, what are their weaknesses, and how would we go about changing them. There is not a lot of assumptions for this video. I will assume a competitive gameplay, well, kind of competitive gameplay, right? So I will assume that players are trying to win, maybe not too hard, but if they want to play elephants, they will play elephants. And this guide is dated as 12th of August, not sure what changes in the new patch, but let's see. So first, let's start by just overviewing elephants. We will start with War Elephant. This is the melee version of an elephant. It costs 750 resources, about 50-50 on food and gold, and it occupies 3 population and produces for 1 minute. So just to compare it with a knight costs about 3 times less and occupies only 1 population, but also is getting produced in approximately 35 seconds. And if we look at another statistics, we can see it has multiple types of attack. So there is a charge attack, there is a spear and tusk attack. In general, it works similarly to knights or lancers, because it also charges into opponent, and then it just attacks with other melee attacks. And you can also see it has in Castle Age armor similar to knights, Armament arms, but 1 more ranged armor, while also being slower, and in Imperial Age its armor increases. Okay, so some of the strengths of this unit are that it's very strong in direct fight. It's actually better than knights and better than men at arms. If we compare health to knights and armor to knights, so 3 knights they have in total about 700 HP, and War Elephant you can see has 850, so it's more. Also a little bit more ranged armor, and if you look at DPS, War Elephant DPS will also be greater than DPS of 3 knights. And another factor is production speed, because War Elephant is produced in 1 minute, and for 3 knights it takes about 1 minute and a half, or maybe 1 minute and 45 seconds to produce 3 knights. So it's also a win. But also, War Elephants, they have some weaknesses of course. They're slow, they can get countered by spearmen and crossbows, and spearman crossbow is a very popular composition. But how would we go about comparing War Elephant to other alternatives? Let's first compare them with lancers, or with knights. It's the same unit, and we already said that War Elephant is better at production speed, so it's easier to mess them, and in combat it will be stronger, and also it's a little bit better against archers. But knights simply have too much utility outside of combat. For example, they can be used to raid your opponent or fight for relics, and if you're getting countered by spearmen or crossbows, you can simply run away, right? With War Elephants it's not easy to run away. Oftentimes you just lose your elephants because you cannot run away from spearmen or from crossbows. So maybe we should compare War Elephants to men at arms, because men at arms are also slow. And it is about the same benefits for War Elephants, but now the production speed is much better than for men at arms at the same cost, and also you need less food for War Elephants, less percentage of food, because for men at arms it's almost entirely food, it's 100 food and 20 gold. Here it's about 50-50. But men at arms, they have other benefits. For example, you can spam them in almost any situation in combat. because they are not countered by spearmen. The only real counter to them is crossbows, and it's just easier to swarm the opponent with man-at-arms. So crossbows, they will have a much easier time when sniping war elephants. But also, I would say that man-at-arms can be used to raid, and they move faster than a war elephant, and it's just better, because you can split your man-at-arms into several groups. You can maybe send 1 or 2 man-at-arms to raid opponent's food collection or gold. So man-at-arms, they also have a little bit more utility than war elephants, and also it's more difficult to counter them. You can use them in most fights without any problems. Okay, so this is it about war elephants. Let's talk now about tower elephants, and this is their counterpart. It's like elephant that primarily attacks from range, but also can use its task attack. And this unit, it's similar in that it takes 3 population. It's also kind of expensive. It is a total of 1000 resources, most of it gold, and also now it's 333 resources per 1 population. And its production is even more efficient, but also it has some unique aspects. First of all, it acts like a mango die, in the sense that it has some archers on top of it, or crossbows, and if you are moving or if you're standing, attacking, these units will shoot. So you can think of a tower elephant as a giant, slow mango die. Also, their defense is more towards range side, and it almost has no defense against melee. By the way, stats on the right is Imperial Age with all upgrades, and this is simply a Castle Age without any upgrades. And you can also see that movement speed is really terrible for them. For melee elephants it was about 1 tile per second, here it's even less than 1 tile. It's about the same speed as a mangonel. And of course, this elephant has some benefits. For example, its ranged armor is very high, it's very good against crossbows or archers, and production speed is also good. But also, it's just very slow, its damage is not very high. So you can see, even after the upgrade in Imperial Age, it's only about 3 crossbows, because it is 2 crossbows with attack speed about 66% of 1 crossbow. So we multiply it by 150%, we get 3 crossbows. And these archers, they're easier to think about as crossbowmen also. So we can approximate it as 3 crossbows. And of course, tower elephants, because they are ranged units, ranged cavalry, they're encountered by spearmen and by horsemen, and also hand cannoneers just make a short job of them. Even though they have a lot of ranged armor, hand cannoneers still can snipe them pretty easily. So let's compare them to crossbows. If you have to choose between tower elephant and crossbow, you will see that crossbows, they're just better in most situations because they have more damage, they even move faster, and against spearmen, you would rather have crossbows. At least you can run away and somewhat snipe them. Tower elephants cannot easily run away, and it's better against ranged, of course, because of this range defense, but also it just doesn't do as much damage. And against hand cannoneers, it's basically same thing, but also hand cannoneers just better versus almost any unit. Even against archer or crossbows, I think I would rather have hand cannoneers, but not sure about that. The only benefit tower elephant has compared to hand cannoneers or crossbows is that it's better defended against keeps or town centers or just ranged fire of towers, but it's very situational. So also there is this Sultan's Elite Tower Elephant. There is not much to say about it. It's essentially the same as a Tower Elephant, but it's unique, it's hand cannoneers on top of it. And you also get it only from your unique landmark in the Imperial Age. I would say it's about 2.5 hand cannoneers adjusted for attack speed. Yeah, it's really similar to Tower Elephant, slightly better damage, but all the same weaknesses. Alright, so what are some problems we have talked about? Let's try to group them into different groups. So first of all, the elephant in the room is daily playstyle. Usually when you're playing daily, you're trying to be very aggressive in feudal age, you go for Gazi Raiders, archers, or maybe you transition to Castle Age, but if you're in Castle Age, you like to go for crossbows and siege and keeps on sacred sites. You don't really want to go for elephants to do some death push. If you want to go some quick tempo, do some damage and collect relics, Usually you go for knights, but elephants are just too slow for your purposes. To secure sacred sites, usually they are too slow. To attack your opponent, they are not the best option either. So there is simply no space for them in daily strategies. And problem number 2, I would say, is connected to problem number 1. It is that elephants are simply not very impactful. So if you look at the DPS of Tower Elephant, if you consider only ranged attack, you can see it's approximately the same as 3 crossbowmen. This is just not enough, right? For example, if you had your 1000 resources, which is the cost of this elephant, you could spend them to get 8 crossbows. And of course, 8 crossbows, it's about 3 times the DPS increase of compared to 1 elephant. But also your 8 crossbowmen, they benefit from movement speed. They are simply quicker than this elephant. They get the unique daily upgrade for infantry move speed ability. And also they shoot faster because of Tower of Victory. And it becomes very, very difficult to justify why would you go for this unit, unless you're just fighting a lot of archers and crossbows. Unless you're in such situation, it's always better to go for crossbows. And war elephants, which are melee elephants, they are okay at fights, so it's easier to justify playing them. But also, if you're not fighting, if your opponent is heavily countering you, you need to use your war elephants as a utility, right? At least you would use your knights or men-at-arms as a utility. To raid, for example, control some resources, get relics. But because they're so slow and so big, it's impossible to use them to raid efficiently. They get surrounded too easily. You can just run away from them. Even villagers can just run away from them. They're not very scary. And if you want to build them in any case to form a reliable frontline, like you would make men-at-arms in many cases, they still die to spearmen, and it's easy to snipe them with crossbows, so they're not very good for it. Okay, so problem number 3 is that they're easy to counter. It's also connected to previous problems. You can see the compositions that can be used to counter elephants, spearmen in both cases, of course, crossbows, horsemen, all fairly cheap, I would say, not very expensive units, and they have a lot of utility. Horsemen, for example. Crossbows are just a multi-purpose fighting unit, which you go in most games anyway. And even if you don't go for these units, you can simply run away from elephants until you run under your keep, or you get your counter units, some spearmen. And if you're playing Imperial game, you will be going hand cannoneers, and hand cannoneers will absolutely shred elephants. There is just no question about it. Unless you have 10 elephants or 15 elephants, they will all get destroyed by hand cannoneers really easily. Or maybe even by bombards or culverins or something like this. Okay, so what are some of the solutions I would propose? Again, I want to focus. I'm thinking about if we did all of these changes at the same time, because they kind of depend on each other. So solution number 0 is not really a solution, but just a consideration. If daily were to be reworked, so it doesn't have to fight for sacred sites or be very, very aggressive in feudal age, or just gets its gadget raiders or crossbows nerfed, or maybe gets some economic improvement, maybe then we could see more elephants. Because elephants, they don't really support this very, very aggressive raiding type of play. They are more towards big fights and just slowly pushing type of play, I would say. If we saw some changes to daily like that, I think we could see more elephants. But again, this is not a real solution, it's just a consideration. Let's get to real solutions. First of all is increasing movement speed. This seems like a really, really easy change to me. It's elephants right now are just too slow. It makes absolutely no sense that men-at-arms and crossbows can move more quickly than elephants. Elephants, they are big animals with 4 legs. They should be able to move more quickly. And besides, it would just make elephants useful for countering raids. And you could even maybe raid a little bit with elephants. For example, go with a tower elephant to enemy farms, to enemy resources. Just dive under towers. It could be fun. It also could be a risky strategy because they still could be surrounded and killed. But there is no question that elephants need some increased movement speed. because right now it's too easy to run away from them, you can't force a fight, you can't use them outside combat. Yeah. So I don't think anything bad would happen if their movement speed would be increased somewhat. Second solution is to add trample ability. I think this could be a very interesting one. So you know how Byzantine cataphracts have trample ability. They can get inside enemy army composition, they can break siege, just tank enemy range units. And it makes no sense that cataphracts, which are just heavily armored horsemen, they can do it, and elephants cannot. When elephants, they were always like historically used to do exactly this kind of thing. So why not let them do it in game? Just if you give them trample ability, they will be able to shortly increase their movement speed and just charge into enemy lines and ram through enemy units, dealing damage and maybe slowing them slightly, maybe applying some damage decrease or increase on enemies, so it's easier to attack them and it's more difficult for them to fight. And you could break mangonels this way. So I think if we added trample ability, it would be really fun. It would add this tactical component where your opponent has to play around it, dodge it like mangonels, maybe split his forces just as you start to trample and surround with spearmen, or maybe just run away. And I think it could be a very fun addition to gameplay, and it could actually make elephants much better in fights. And I would say the only side effect is that opponents would play spearmen more frequently against daily, which I do not think is a bad thing, because against some civilizations you just play more spearmen, more crossbows. It's not terrible, I think. And this would be my suggestion for increasing their usefulness inside combats. Elephants would become a genuine threat you have to play around, and you can base your strategy on. So another solution would be to readjust tower elephant statistics. Right now we saw that tower elephants simply do not do enough damage. It's like 3 crossbows when you could make 8 crossbows instead. And for me it just makes sense if tower elephant DPS would be increased. Maybe cost would be reduced to make it more affordable to make them, but also reduce their armor and HP, because they don't really need to be as tanky against ranged units, right? Your opponent, he isn't going to attack your tower elephant with archers or crossbows anyway. He will be making other units to counter them, and I think it's better to make tower elephant a more generalist unit, which is kind of okay against everything, maybe slightly less against spearmen or horsemen because they can counter it, but also it's not as oppressive against archers and crossbows, and also it's more affordable, so you can actually play him and do not feel bad when you lose him, because it will not be losing 1000 resources, it will only be 750, and it will actually do some damage before it dies. Yeah, and also maybe give them trample ability, could also bring up some interesting tactical gameplay. And my solution number 4 is just my personal, I would say, complaint about janissaries, because if you're playing against Ottoman, you absolutely cannot play elephants. They are slow units, and janissaries simply shred them, because janissaries get about 2 times bonus damage against cavalry. It's simply way too oppressive, and it's impossible to play against. So I would say this would actually be a good change if janissaries lost their bonus damage against cavalry, or maybe it would be heavily decreased, because other civilizations, they would start to play cavalry against Ottomans too. Of course, Ottomans would need some other buffs, but the problem is that if you're playing against Ottomans, you're just playing infantry. You're just playing ranged units, melee units, siege. You do not go for cavalry, though, and it just makes no sense to me. Yeah, so this would be my personal preference. Alright, so this concludes my suggestions. In general, I think elephants are too slow right now, and their usefulness is very limited, and which is why I suggest just increasing their movement speed to make them a little bit quicker, give them this trample ability to make them an interesting menace in fights. So I think after these changes, first of all, it will be much easier and cooler to use elephants in fights. So I already described how you can trample enemy lines, maybe get through some spearmen, get to ranged units, break siege. It would be very cool, it would add a lot of variety to gameplay, and also add some skill expression, where your opponent has to play around it and surround your elephants. I think it would be just fantastic. Second, elephants, if they have more movement speed, of course they will have more utility. It would be able to stop raids with them, especially cavalry raids. It would be possible to maybe raid enemy resources, because they would be as quick as man-at-arms. Of course, it's not always easy to raid with man-at-arms, but it's possible, right? And it could be a risky strategy, because your opponent could catch your elephant off guard, but also it would be possible. And lastly, I would say that tower elephants, especially tower elephants, would be more useful and more affordable, because right now it simply doesn't feel good to use them. They don't do damage, they die too easily. But after the changes, you would go war elephants to get yourself a front line and trample your opponent, and we would use tower elephants just as your additional bulwark and your mobile support platform that maybe could get sniped. Alright, so this concludes my suggestions. If you have any additional suggestions or maybe comments or some thoughts about elephants, you can leave them in the comments, so I'll be glad to see them. Alright, so thank you for watching.